The British Empire had crushed armies across the world. From the plains of Bengal to the battlefields of Europe, British officers believed there was no force they could not eventually overpower. Yet in 1814, high in the foothills of the Himalayas, that confidence shattered. Not because of a grand battlefield clash, not because of a massive army, but because of a small hilltop fort, defended by a few hundred soldiers who refused to surrender. This is the story of Nalapani, a siege that was never supposed to last, a battle that should have been forgotten, and a moment that permanently changed how the British viewed Nepal and its warriors. At the beginning of the 19th century, South Asia was in flux. The Mughal Empire had collapsed into fragments. Regional kingdoms rose and fell, and filling that vacuum was a private company with imperial ambition, the British East India Company. By 1810, the company controlled vast territories across India. It had its own army, its own governors, and its own foreign policy. Expansion was not optional. It was essential to profit and security. To the north, another power had emerged. Nepal, recently unified under the Shah dynasty, was no longer a loose collection of hill states. Under its kings and regents, Nepal had forged a centralized state with a hardened military culture. Nepali soldiers, often called Gorkhalis, had spent decades fighting brutal wars of expansion across some of the harshest terrain on Earth. They learned to fight uphill, outnumbered, undersupplied, and isolated. As British and Nepali borders expanded, friction was inevitable. Disputed territories, border raids, clashes between patrols. Diplomacy failed. By late 1814, war was declared. One of the first British objectives was Nalapani Fort, a small defensive position near present-day Dehradun. From the British perspective, it guarded approaches into the Himalayan foothills and threatened supply lines. But Nalapani was not a modern fortress. It had no stone bastions, no heavy artillery, no vast stores of food or water. What it had was leadership. The fort was commanded by Captain Balbhadra Kunwar, a young Nepali officer from a respected military family. Under his command were fewer than 600 people, soldiers, women, and children. Against them stood several thousand British troops, supported by artillery. British officers believed Nalapani would fall in days. They could not have been more wrong. The siege opened with confidence. British cannons roared. Shots slammed into the fort's walls. Smoke rolled across the hillside. Instead of panic, the attackers met silence, followed by disciplined gunfire. Nepali soldiers fired from carefully prepared positions. British assault columns advanced and were cut down. Officers fell. Men hesitated. Every attack was repelled. Day after day, British commanders adjusted tactics. Frontal assaults failed. Flanking maneuvers failed. The defenders did not break. Balbhadra Kunwar refused repeated calls to surrender. His message was clear. The fort would not fall while a single defender remained alive. For British officers accustomed to swift victories, this resistance was deeply unsettling. Nalapani exposed a fundamental weakness in British warfare. European-style armies relied on logistics, open terrain, and massed formations. The Himalayas offered none of these. Paths were narrow. Visibility was limited. Every movement was exhausting. Nepali soldiers exploited every advantage. They attacked supply lines, fired from concealed positions, vanished into terrain the British barely understood. Casualties mounted. What had been intended as a quick operation became a prolonged humiliation. Eventually, British engineers identified Nalapani's greatest vulnerability: water. The fort relied on a limited external water source. British forces cut it off. Inside, conditions became desperate. Wounded soldiers weakened. Children suffered from thirst. Every decision became a moral calculation. The British believed surrender was inevitable. But Balbhadra Kunwar made a different choice. As supplies dwindled, he prepared an escape. Not a retreat of panic, but a calculated withdrawal. On the night of November 30th, 1814, under cover of darkness, the remaining defenders broke out. Carrying their wounded and families, they slipped past British lines and disappeared into the hills. When British troops finally entered Nalapani, they found it empty. No prisoners, no captured commander, no victory, only a ruined fort, and the realization that the defenders had escaped intact. Militarily, Nalapani was a minor engagement. Psychologically, it was devastating. British officers reported unprecedented resistance. Nepali soldiers were no longer seen as irregular hill fighters, but as disciplined, resilient warriors. Confidence evaporated. The myth of easy conquest in the Himalayas was shattered. The war continued until 1816. The British eventually prevailed through overwhelming force, and Nepal was forced to sign the Treaty of Sugoli, losing significant territory. But something unexpected followed. Instead of dismantling Nepal's military culture, the British embraced it. They began recruiting Nepali soldiers into their own ranks. Nalapani became legacy. It did not win the war for Nepal, but it won something arguably more important: respect. It reshaped British military thinking. It established the reputation of Nepali soldiers across the empire. And it became a foundational moment in Nepal's national memory. A reminder that empires are not invincible, especially in unfamiliar terrain. History often remembers who conquered whom, but sometimes the most powerful stories belong to those who refused to yield. Nalapani was not a triumph of numbers. It was a triumph of will, a small fort, a determined commander, and a lesson that echoed across an empire. If you enjoy cinematic explorations of forgotten battles and hidden turning points in history, subscribe for more stories like this. And tell us in the comments, was Nalapani a defeat or one of the greatest moral victories in military history? Thank you for watching.